Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet is going to testify before the House Oversight Committee in November. Special forces are rescuing children from deep underground military bases. The legacy media support of Lue Elizondo is having a giant red pill effect on many people watching. JP's out. Honourable discharge, visit to Veterans Affairs, and future covert missions. A subcommittee of the US Senate Armed Services Committee is also going to hold a UFO meeting in November. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to the September 21st Exopolitics Today Week in Review edition. I'm very pleased to go over the hot stories over the last week. And it really has been a very interesting week. And I want to begin with this story concerning Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. He is going to testify before the House Oversight Committee on UAPs and UFOs in November. So he was a former NOAA administrator, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and he was also a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. So if there's someone that would know what's happening in the oceans, he would be the guy that you would go to, or you would expect that he would have some very interesting stories. And so that's what I think would be very, very interesting if he goes before the House Oversight Committee and actually talks about his first-hand information on underwater UAPs or USOs, rather than just repeating what is available in the open source literature. I've seen him do some interviews in the past. He is very articulate. He's done some very good presentations on historical USO sightings. But what we really need is not someone with high credentials who is giving a kind of overview of open source literature, but what we need is another whistleblower, or at the very least someone prepared to talk about their first-hand experiences. And I'm thinking along the lines of David Grush, who really made an enormous contribution back in July of 2023 when he came forward and he talked about his first-hand experiences. So David Grush is a genuine whistleblower, and we hopefully can hear from Admiral Gallaudet some of his first-hand experiences, as opposed to just putting on a kind of nicely packaged presentation of material that's available in the open source literature. So we really need whistleblowers actually disclosing what's going on, rather than highly credentialed individuals advocating disclosure. Here's a tweet I did about an artistic illustration of the Saturnian system. This was taken, or this illustration is based on data sent by the Cassini spacecraft that has been in the orbit of Saturn for well over a decade. And so it's taken many hundreds of thousands of photos of Saturn and its moons and of the rings. I mean, this is really what I found very interesting about this artistic illustration here, is that you see the rings of Saturn, and this is an illustration based on Cassini data, but you can see the rings and you can see the gaps between the rings. So that's very significant. So you got these massive rings surrounding Saturn, and you got these gaps between the rings. Now, why I tweeted this was because there is a update that's going to be coming out in another week or so about JP, who actually recalls a mission to Saturn. This was something in one of his previous updates that he talked about, that he underwent testing for a upcoming mission to Saturn, and then was thinking that, well, this is a mission that's upcoming, but when he spoke to the briefing officer or the guy that has been giving him the green light to disclose information to me and to the general public, he was told that, well, the Saturn mission may have already happened. But JP didn't remember anything up until recently. So he did have full recall. So he's had total recall of his Saturn mission. And that's going to be discussed at the upcoming Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection. So for those of you who aren't coming or plan to come, or those that are going to watch it online, you're going to get a exclusive. You're going to be able to watch JP give a update on his Saturn mission, and that's quite something what he saw. So that's going to be presented at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection, and there will also be a update that will be released through my Patreon channel and then on YouTube. So that's something that is coming up. But in this update, he talks about the rings of Saturn, that the mining, he was involved in a mining operation of the rings of Saturn, and he talked about some of the gaps between the rings and what happened concerning those gaps. And so very fascinating information. So that is coming up. So here's a update from Gene Decode. Now, Gene Decode, he served for over 20 years in the US Navy, served on 5 different classes of submarines for the US Navy. He achieved a very high NCO rank, and he is someone that really has been doing a lot of research into deep underground military bases. And of course, because of his military background, he has access to facilities, or he has access to people and his own personal experiences that gives him a kind of perspective and an ability to sort the wheat from the chaff, so that we can get a fairly accurate understanding of what's going on. And so he is, in this update, talking about children being rescued from deep underground military bases, that the children that they have been held for a variety of reasons. And of course, there's also adults, females used for slave labor, sex trade, sex workers, and so forth. All of these topics are very, let's say, controversial topics. And so this is why this video interview with Gene Decode wasn't released in full on YouTube. It was made available on Rumble and my Patreon channel, as well as Spotify and some more audio channels, podcasting channels. But definitely he is someone who I think is very credible when it comes to this information about what's happening in deep underground military bases, and these efforts that he is saying are happening right now, that there are efforts involving the Earth Alliance, inner Earth civilizations, and actually positive extraterrestrials to rescue these young ones from captivity and abuse in these underground facilities. So definitely well worth listening to that interview if you haven't already done so. Now, here is something that I thought was very, very interesting. Dr. Stephen Greer was in an interview, and he was asked about Lue Elizondo, and that Elizondo, according to Stephen Greer, is captured by the US intelligence community. Now, I don't believe that. I mean, I think Elizondo is being honest with what he knows. I think he is being played. I think there are more senior officials like Christopher Mellon who are directing Elizondo in a certain direction. But I think he's doing a good job in disclosing what he knows based on his experiences, even though I do have some disagreements with the way he's advocating this UFO threat narrative. But let's listen to this exchange or this interview where Stephen Greer shares his thoughts about Luis Elizondo being captured by the US intel agencies and Luis Elizondo responding to that. So I'll just play that video for you now.
And those operatives are taught very well to take an issue, grab it, capture it, and then spin it in the direction that they want. Now, the direction they want is endless ambiguity. Gee, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. It's nonsense. We've proven what they are. Well, I have 755 whistleblowers.
You have 755 whistleblowers?
Yeah. I mean, this archive is unbelievable.
You had mentioned that you...
What do you think about what he says? Because,
well, where are the whistleblowers? And I'll tell you, isn't he the same guy they wrote an article about, if I'm not mistaken, who apparently was accused of taking people on a tour and then paying some dude to pay, like $500 to drop flare?
Okay, well, I mean, Elizondo's initial response was, where are the whistleblowers? And so that, to me, was very, very strange, because Stephen Greer has actually, and I think this is where he really stands head and shoulders above many other researchers, is that he's provided written transcripts and video testimony of hundreds of whistleblowers since at least 2001 and even before that. And this is recently he's made all those available on the public database. And so for Luis Elizondo to say, well, where are Greer's whistleblowers? I just thought that was just showing his ignorance here about what has been done in the UFO community prior to Elizondo, ATIP, or Sept. I think this is part of the problem that we are having here, is that in a way, there are people who are associated with this OSAP program that really grew out of events happening on the Skinwalker Ranch, which are all kind of like couched in high strangeness and anomalies, and people like Jacques Vallée coming in saying, oh, wow, we don't know what's going on. This is unknown. It could be interdimensional. It could be crypto-terrestrials. It could be anything. And there was money that the US Senate supplied for the studies at the Skinwalker Ranch. And out of that, you had the outgrowth of ATIP that Elizondo was asked to head. And so there's this tendency to make that UFO history like the official history, like the credible history. And that the work of people like Stephen Greer and others in interviewing hundreds of whistleblowers and making their testimonies available in video and written format, to just kind of like forget about that. And that's unfortunately what Elizondo has done here when he says, well, where are the whistleblowers that Greer is referring to? Well, it's a matter of the public record. Hundreds of these people, their testimonies have been made available in video or in written transcripts. And I do agree with what Greer has to say about the subject matter of UFOs being deliberately obfuscated by the intelligence community, making it something unknown, something that's mysterious, where people like Jacques Vallée are cited liberally, whereas Greer is absolutely correct. They know clearly what they are, that these are extraterrestrial visitors coming from distant star systems, and they are interacting with our planet. And that's been known since the 1940s and 1950s. So Greer is absolutely correct about that, and that's based on his analyses of hundreds of whistleblowers. And I think that this kind of like, I wouldn't refer to it as a pissing contest. Maybe it is. I mean, two high-powered alpha males are competing for the media limelight. And at the moment, Luis Elizondo is getting a lot of that. and Stephen Greer undeservedly is being ignored, and that's unfortunate, because I think Greer really has a lot of data to present on these whistleblowers, and certainly there are whistleblowers I've interviewed as well that I think people like Ruezo Elizondo and others would benefit from learning more about. But as far as Elizondo being someone that is a asset of the intelligence community, I can see how you can conclude that by Elizondo's emphasis on UFOs being a national security threat. That is a concern. I don't agree with that. But I think Elizondo is probably doing that out of his sincere conviction that that's what they are. I mean, I read the guy's, or listened to the audio book version of his book Imminent, and I think what you see is what you get with the Lue Elizondo, and I think he is sincere in what he has said, but I have strong disagreements, and I certainly disagree with him when it comes to his rebuttal of Stephen Greer saying something nonsensical like, well, where are the whistleblowers? Okay, Elena Danaan, she does these Star Nations news on a weekly basis, where she gives information from the perspective of different extraterrestrial civilizations. And so in this particular episode, Elena relayed a very informative message from Oona, an Altean extraterrestrial, about the pulse sound detected from the Starliner spacecraft that was docked at the ISS. I mean, this is something I've covered in the last 2 week in review, so I don't need to play the sound again for you. But what Oona relayed through Elena is that this pulse is part of the plasma consciousness that is animating space arcs, and that these space arcs were dormant up until recently, and they were activated by the arrival of the Intergalactic Federation. And so then you started hearing the pulse. And so that pulse sound in the Starliner aircraft is really the sound of an activated space arc. And she's also Oona also describes how another pulse sound from the moon contains a coded message similar to the ET signal in the movie Contact, which is currently being deciphered. So that's an interesting piece of new information, that the moon is a giant space arc, and it has a control center. It has an organic consciousness that animates it, and that it also is sending a pulse, and that pulse is a coded message. So kind of like very similar to the pulse that is heard in the movie Contact. You also hear something similar coming from the moon, but it has information in it. And I mentioned previously, and I'll say it again, that JP, who's now US Army retired as of August 30, he has gone from active duty to retired status as a US Army serviceman. And so he shares his information, how the pulse is very similar to what he heard when inside the space arc. So there you have first-hand testimony from someone who was active duty US Army, who was inside a space arc at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean and hearing this pulse. And so finally, Elena Danaan talks about the need to decipher these pulses. So yeah, very interesting to listen to the Star Nations news from last week. Okay, so here we go again. So this is another story involving Lue Elizondo. So Ross Coulthart and Lue Elizondo discussed the possibility of finding a buried 747 under ancient structures that are built over them. So let's just listen to this clip. It goes for 45 seconds, and you get to hear what Ruezo Elizondo has to say.
A 747 isn't uncommon to see at an international airport. But imagine being the first guy to break into King Tut's tomb, and of all the things you find in there, you find an intact 747 sitting in the tomb. Doesn't make sense, does it? because 747s weren't around when King Tut was around. So what the hell is a 747 doing in King Tut's tomb? So that's the best analogy that I can use without going into further detail.
People are going to question what I'm about to say. What if some of that shit is so big it can't be moved? So big they built a building over it. In a country outside of the United States of America. Let's see this investigated. Let's just see what happens. Let's test these allegations before the Congress.
So, that's very intriguing what they're doing there. I think what they are alluding to is space arks buried under ancient structures, which is exactly what a few people have been saying. I've mentioned JP, Elena Danaan, Jean-Charles Moyen. They are some of the people who have talked about space arks being buried under ancient structures. And I think this is something that is very critical to understand, that ancient societies, or to put it more correctly, the way it's been explained is that you have these seeder civilizations, you have these extraterrestrials that come in and they seed a colony here. And what they do in seeding a colony is that they'll leave behind a ship, a spacecraft, a space ark. And that space ark will be buried, but it will be used to jumpstart a new civilization on the planet. And over the eons of time, that space ark continues to remain there to be used either to continue seeding that civilization with advanced technologies, or to be used as an evacuation vehicle if there's a need. So I think this is something that I've been discussing for a few years now, the possibility that there are many space arks buried all over the Earth under ancient structures. So I think the fact that Ross Coulthart, a very well-known Australian journalist, and Lue Elizondo are discussing very large UFOs, the size of a 747, being buried under ancient structures, it's like they're nudging us. It's like we're being nudged in this direction, that in the future there's going to be announcements, discoveries of these giant spacecraft under ancient structures. And I think that this is something that is eventually going to be disclosed. I think that's going to be something that's going to really help kick us forward into a Star Trek future when they start making these kind of announcements. And it kind of makes sense that you can start off with the discovery of ancient spacecraft under the Earth, under the oceans, the contact with inner Earth civilizations, and then you start talking about extraterrestrial visitors from other solar systems in terms of a disclosure pathway that's not going to be that disruptive. All right, well, here's my announcement for my next monthly live briefing, where I do a roundup of major exopolitics stories over the preceding 4 weeks. I give an analysis of the leading geopolitical news, but give you an exopolitics perspective on that, because that is something that I think is very desperately needed. There's a lot of very major geopolitical events unfolding around us. And while there are many experts talking about these geopolitical events and giving you nuanced information about those events, whether we're talking Ukraine, whether we're talking Israel, Palestine, whether we're talking Taiwan, China, the exopolitical perspective is ignored. People don't know it. And so this is what I really look forward to being able to present to, because I actually was international politics and geopolitics expert before I got into the exopolitics field. So it's really delightful for me to be able to talk about some hot geopolitical conflicts or issues from an exopolitical perspective. And then finally, there's a 1-hour Q&A. So you just join my Patreon channel, and that's how you register. If you don't want to join Patreon, you can also just register by going to PayPal, and so just click the link, or you can just go to my exopolitics.org site, and so I discuss the briefing. I give you a little overview of what's going to be discussed. So this will be episode 2. So that'll be October 5. So you can register now through Patreon or through directly through Crowdcast using PayPal. So those are the 2 ways to register. Okay, I was a guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Noory discussing Book 3 in my US Army Insider Missions. So that was on Tuesday and Wednesday. So, yeah, here's a little synopsis of what was discussed there. So on the Coast to Coast AM, they give you a little synopsis of what was discussed. So I talked about JP's missions as I covered them in Volume 3 of US Army Insider Missions. And so that's something that you can listen to. And of course, the book, US Army Insider Missions 3, that's available on Amazon or on Lulu. So I've published the paperback on 2 places. And there's also the Kindle edition that you can only get on Amazon at the moment. Here's something. The legacy media's support of Lue Elizondo is having a big red pill effect on UFO and non-human intelligence awareness, as a Daily Show viewer reports. Okay, so here's what. So Lue Elizondo, he's been given the red carpet treatment. He's going all over the main legacy media, doing lots and lots of interviews. His book is a #1 bestseller, New York Times bestseller. So he's doing very well with his book, and he's kind of like now become the poster boy for disclosure. And yeah, he opens the door, and I think that's a good thing. I don't resent the role he's playing. I think it's a necessary role. You have to open the door somehow. And while I have a different view on this whole UFO threat narrative and wish that they could reveal more of what's going on, I think you need to open the door to people that have been blue-pilled all their adult lives. And here's a good example. So you've got a lifelong engineer, and this is what he says. I'm an engineer, have been all my life, completely skeptical of UFO phenomenon. Saw this guy, Lue Elizondo in Daily Show, spitting some facts. And it goes on in the discussion. To be frank, I have that terrified feeling in my gut. Is this for real? Is US government actually going to confess the existence of aliens? I'm not shaken. It's a bit of a twist in my worldview. Don't know how to digest this stuff. Where to start? I have zero knowledge of what to expect. Always thought Roswell and the rest of it is more like a tourist attraction. If I have to understand this, where to start? Is it like Independence Day aliens or something else? So I think this is a good example of the type of person that is being woken up by Lue Elizondo and his book Imminent. And I think it's a good thing. You've got to start. Open the door. You can say, yep, UFOs are absolutely real. Yep, some UFO craft have been recovered. Yep, they involve non-human intelligence. And by the way, we're trying to reverse engineer them, but we haven't been able to successfully do so. So, right there, that's a lie. But nevertheless, I think this is something that has a tremendous effect on people who all their lives, like this engineer, have been skeptical of Roswell, skeptical of people talking about the UFO issue. That's the sort of person. I'm sure many of you watching this, you go to Thanksgiving or you go to a celebration at your family home and you say what you're thinking about UFOs or what you know about it, and someone kind of like shouts you down and say you're deluded, you're just fanciful, wishful thinking, and all of that stuff. I mean, we all know that, but I think this engineer is a good example of someone who has always been in that camp, but now because of Lue Elizondo's book, he is saying that he's had to reevaluate everything. So that's a good thing. All right, so here we move to another high-profile personality, a former astronaut, former U.S. Navy pilot, and a current U.S. Senator, Mark Kelly, says he hasn't encountered ET life while in space and doesn't know what UFOs are. Okay, so let's hear what Mark Kelly has. I'll just play a little clip where you get to hear his thoughts on what the UFO phenomenon is all about.
I've seen a number of folks in respected media respond pretty alarmist to the UFO testimony. Right. And so I am sure that you found that amusing. Why? I mean, you're going to see conspiracy theory, of course, but why is there so much excitement about this supposed intelligence?
Well, I mean, it's, our galaxy is a big place. The universe is 2 trillion galaxies, and we've got, hundreds of billions of stars and planets in our own, and it's, something people often think about. Is there life out there somewhere else? What is that life like? Does that life visit here? Does visit Earth? I get these questions all the time. People think because I've been to space, like maybe I have this special insight, or maybe I've seen something while I've spent time orbiting the Earth. I haven't. I don't think we've got visitors from other places. Having said that, I've seen some compelling testimony, from Navy fighter pilots. Who, often in one case in a position of leadership in a squadron, that's seen something very compelling. It's our obligation, on the Armed Services Committee.
Something that he is convinced is technologically not possible by the U.S. or adversaries.
In one case, that is.
All right, so I think you get the idea. So he is claiming, the former astronaut Mark Kelly is claiming that while he was in space, he didn't see anything, that he doesn't believe we're being visited, but his position is that while there are credible reports by these Navy pilots concerning these UFOs, and so they should be investigated. So I think this is something that is showing again how there is this pattern where even though there's been 7 decades of UFO research involving thousands of testimonies from credible witnesses, including former astronauts, whistleblower revelations, contactee reports, etc., officials like Senator Mark Kelly all boil it down to a few Navy pilots' site reports and say that's all we know about UFOs. So, that's a kind of very suspicious. I mean, when you have so many senior officials who are just ignoring all this incredible database of information about UFOs and people interacting with them or photographing them and all the evidence that's been supplied, and just saying, well, a few Navy pilots have seen it, and so therefore it's a real issue and we need to explore it. So it's taking a very parsimonious approach, restricting UFO data from this broad spectrum of hundreds, thousands of reports that are all deemed kind of like conspiracy theory or anecdotal, and then saying, well, there are these credible reports by these people like Navy pilots backed by military videos and radar interceptions and so forth, and that's real, and so that's the basis for us understanding this phenomenon. So, to me, that's very fishy when you have people trying to do that. And that is what's happening now. And we see Senator Mark Kelly does fall into that category. Okay, so here's the big news for this week, especially for those following the information about JP. He is now officially out of the U.S. military. He received an honorable discharge. He served for 4 years, 7 months, and 20-something days, but was given a military pension. I mean, he was retired, which is very unusual, and the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, and this is actually, I bring it back to Lue Elizondo. In his book, Lue Elizondo, in Imminent, he actually says that people will be surprised to learn that those injured as a result of their UFO interactions or experiences while serving in the military are given full retirement benefits. And that is a policy that was adopted by James Mattis, Secretary of Defense James Mattis. And so Lue Elizondo was kind of like acknowledging his former superior for passing that policy. But this is what JP experienced. He was injured as a result of a number of things, including his UFO interactions, and those things that go into the arm. As a Army serviceman, he was that was mandatory, and that also impacted his well-being, shall we say. And so he has retired, but there's good things that will be coming from that he will still be able to do missions. What, as I understand it, essentially what this means is that JP will no longer have to do the kind of obligatory work that was associated with his normal occupation or MOS as a quartermaster and chemical equipment repairer, which took up, say, 95 to 98% of his time while in the Army, and the other 2%, 5%, he was doing these covert missions. Well, now that he's been officially retired and given a retirement package, his time now, he can dedicate his time to his full recovery, looking after his health. People have many suggestions for that, and thanks to all of you who have been giving him suggestions. I mean, I know he does appreciate those, but also when he is still needed for missions, he will be called upon, and he's been told that. So really what this honourable discharge and his receiving a retirement or his new retirement status with the US Army means that he no longer does normal duties that takes up a lot of his time. Now he can just relax, be with his wife and family, but when he's needed for a mission, he just goes on that mission, gets a text message or something with a particular code, and off he goes. So that update, where we talk about that, and his visit to Veterans Affairs, where he's explained what his future missions will involve in terms of voluntary missions through Veterans Affairs, so that there's a covert operations that are run through Veterans Affairs involving retirees or veterans, and these are voluntary missions. But there's also the missions that JP will still be doing on behalf of that covert branch of the US Air Force, where he was being green-lighted by a senior officer, and I've talked about that. So all those updates, that update number 37 is available on my different channels. Okay, so here's another story about a US Congress taking the UFO issue seriously. So now we have learned through Senator Kirsten Gillibrand that a subcommittee of the US Senate Armed Services Committee is going to hold a UFO hearing after the November 2024 elections. So Senator Gillibrand, she's the chair of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, and she wants the AARO office, that's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, to give a progress report on UFO sightings. And so, as the subcommittee name suggests, I mean, this is the subcommittee on emerging threats and capabilities. I mean, this is going to be spun. It's annoying how Twitter gives you Ask Groke. I don't want to ask Groke anything, but here it is. Okay, so this is, the information is going to be spun in the direction of UFOs being an emerging threat and their capabilities. And people like Ruezo Elizondo are likely to play a prominent role in that, given his counterintelligence background, his new book about ATIP, and, of course, his take that this is a very important national security threat that should not be ignored. I mean, that's his big grievance with the Pentagon. He thinks that the Pentagon hasn't taken the UFO issue seriously, whereas I mean, in truth, they have taken it very seriously. But I think mid-level bureaucrats like Lue Elizondo, when he was serving, didn't have access to what was really being done. I mean, there are levels of access, levels of secrecy. And while Ruezo Elizondo did have top secret security clearance and access to sensitive compartment information facilities, he was not cleared at that sufficient level or have need to know about what it is that's really going on, and that concerns fully functional reverse engineered alien spacecraft that are used in secret space programs to interact, meet, and reach agreements with different extraterrestrial visitors. So, but given his limited information pool, I think this is what the US Senate is going to be focusing on, as will the US House of Representatives, their House Oversight Committee. So it does raise the question, well, I mean, if you have both branches of the US Congress now holding hearings on UFOs being a national security threat, and you have all of these sightings of UFOs and aliens and all of that, is this really the what's going to precede this kind of false flag alien event that people have been talking about for many decades now? It's a good question. So here's Terrance Howard, who has this idea that humans living underground naturally evolve into grey extraterrestrial-like entities. Now, his take, his idea there is very, very similar to what grey extraterrestrials have told abductees for decades now, that the greys say that they are us from the future and that they want to restore their genetics, and that's why they're here conducting these genetic experiments. And so this is where you have Terrance Howard being on the Joe Rogan show, and he says that, here's what he has to say. Iron Man actor Terrance Howard said that as Earth in the future leaves the Goldilocks zone, to survive, humans will have to go underground, which will make their skin grey and their eyes black and large. And so, this, to me, it's like, this is the idea that the greys have been telling us, that in the future, that the Earth will undergo some kind of cataclysm that will force surface humanity to go underground, and they will then evolve into these grey-like beings. And after breeding out their emotions because of guilt over the conflicts that led to the destruction of planet Earth, that their genetics degrade, and they're back now to kind of like ask our assistance so that they can restore their genetics or create a new hybrid race. So that's the idea that the greys have been proposing. Now, the problem with that is that, and the Terrance Howard, I think, just isn't aware of this literature, that for thousands of years there have been human-looking civilizations under the Earth that date back to Lemuria, Atlantis. We're talking more than 10,000 years. And that they still look very, very human. There hasn't been any kind of genetic degradation to look like greys at all. And they come from these cities like Telos, Agartha, Shambhala, and so forth. So I think that this idea that the Greys are our future descendants, that they are us in the future, is really propaganda that's designed for infiltration and a takeover agenda. So we do need to be very careful of that. Okay, so here's a update I received from Ruezo Zanrico, and that's a pseudonym, that's not his real name. He is actually working for a military contractor, and so he doesn't want to share information about himself because he's reliant on that salary and that job and career. But nevertheless, he was very, very interested in JP's information about a submerged space ark buried out in the Bermuda Triangle. And so what he began to do was he began to track anomalous military ship activity in that region that JP identified as where the space ark was. Now, in 2023, during Hurricane Lee, JP reported that the space ark moved into a more central position of the Atlantic Ocean. And again, JP described a donut-shaped ship that belonged to the US Navy being directly suspended over the space ark, that it eventually found the space ark in this other region of the mid-Atlantic, and that there were a lot of other ships from different countries in the proximity of that donut ship and all interacting to find out what's going on. So what Ruezo Zanrico has done is that he has compiled or put together a video description of the anomalous ship activity in the region where JP says that the space ark was originally and where it is now. And so it is, I think, very, very helpful, especially for people that want empirical evidence. Is there empirical evidence? Is there independent evidence supporting JP's claims that there is a buried space ark at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and that, according to Elena Danaan, that space ark was what seeded the Atlantean civilization, that in fact it was buried under the capital city, Poseidon. And I mentioned earlier this Ross Coulthart and Lue Elizondo discussing the possibility of these kind of jumbo jet-sized UFOs being buried under ancient artifacts. I think that's absolutely correct, and that this Atlantic space ark was once buried under the Atlantean capital, but then after the Earth changes that led to Atlantis' destruction and its sinking, the space ark has been residing at the bottom of the ocean until it's been activated with the arrival of these cedar ships, and now it's moved into this more central position of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I think a very important source that corroborated that JP was onto something here, or that his missions were grounded in something genuinely ancient and alien being buried at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, that came through a remote viewing session that Dick Allgire's team did back in April of 2023. So they corroborate JP's claims, and there's also a very popular YouTube channel, Monkey Works, where he tracks airplane flights over the United States and over the world to deduce what's happening today in geopolitics or in US national politics. But he also tracked anomalous military ship activity in that same area of the Atlantic Ocean. So I think this is very helpful if you're looking for empirical data to substantiate what JP is saying. Then you can watch this situation report by Ruezo Zanrico. It's just under 20 minutes in length, and he's presenting it because it is something that, is very, very relevant to JP's testimony. And the Space Ark will probably come up at some point in the GSIC, that's the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference, that's being held from September 27 to 29 in Westminster, Colorado, just outside of Denver City there. Here's a very informative analysis of some data showing a link between the JFK assassination and UFOs and secret space programs. And I know the author of this article. He is in the investment world, and he's very interested in free energy and advanced technology projects. And so he has put together an article here that shares a lot of information, a lot of exopolitical information concerning the JFK assassination and how it is related to what JFK knew about UFOs, Nazis, free energy, and of extraterrestrial visitation on Earth. It is quite detailed, so the link is there. So just go to globalintelhub.com and you can read that article. Very detailed. It does use a range of sources. Here's, for example, a webinar I did on the Kennedy assassination, which is available on my YouTube channel for free. So you can watch that full 2-hour webinar for free on my YouTube channel. And a lot of information packed in that video. And this article brings up some very interesting corroborating data. So that is it for this week in review. I want to thank you. If you are a Patreon subscriber, really appreciate you subscribing to my channel. You do directly help support Exopolitics today, so we are very grateful for that. So I want to thank you all for watching this, and I look forward to next week, where I will be reporting from the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference. I'll be doing my presentation from there next week, so you will get to hear me give a report on the first day at the GSIC conference. So thank you for watching, and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.